the Poison type. A type that used to infuriate many players due to the status condition of poison, which causes you to take damage as you walked, as well as being omnipresent, which caused you to countlessly encounter them. Seemingly is no longer viewed as a problem. So how did this type that was distributed everywhere deteriorate into one that is almost never seen? Let's take a closer look at Poison, the type Corroded by the numbers. We'll start by looking at the Poison type properties and how it changed over the years. When it was first released, Poison was super effective against 2 types while having 3 weaknesses. It was also able to resist 3 types, but 4 types were also able to resist Poison type attacks. Overall, it wasn't that bad in Generation 1. But in Generation 2, Poison is no longer super effective against Bug, and Bug is no longer super effective against Poison. Instead, Poison just resists Bug. Then we got introduced to the Steel type, and as we all know, is a type that is able to completely shut out Poison by being immune to it. Poison wasn't really a groundbreaking type to begin with, and this certainly doesn't help. But finally, in Generation 6, Poison does get some help with the existence of the Fairy type, where it's able to resist it alongside being super effective against it. All in all, the Poison type is mainly used as a defensive type due to its array of resistances, while its offense, well, just hope you have some other attack that isn't Poison type. Now let's take a look at how the Poison type went from being the most common type that was seen everywhere to one that has become scarce and rare. Just know the following calculation is only considering regular and regional forms. Megas and alternative forms will not be mentioned until later on. We start with Kanto, the most annoying release of Poison type Pokemon, where a total of 33 out of 151 Pokemon from Kanto were associated with the Poison type. This made it not only the most seen type in Kanto, where it beat the Water type by just 1 appearance, but still stands today as a record for most releases of a singular type for any generation. And I don't think this record will ever be broken. This also made playing the game really annoying since basically all Poison type Pokemon possess the capability of poisoning your Pokemon. Overall, this large collection of Poison type Pokemon had Poison come out with an average base stat total of 383, placing it in the bottom 3 of all types in Kanto. Of course, there are a lot of non-fully evolved mons included for this. So when looking at just final stage mons from Kanto, Poison places in 11th with a stat total of 484. Slightly below average, but it makes up for it due to the Poison status that it's able to inflict. Although, Burn might be even better with its reducing attack stat effect, paired with Fire being the second highest base stat average total amongst fully evolved mons in Kanto. But more on that when I actually make a video for the Fire type. Anyways, onto Johto, where we were only introduced to 4 Poison type Pokemon. This makes the number of Poison types seen in Kanto and the number of Poison types seen in Johto have the largest disparity in introduction of any types across any region, with a huge gap of 29. And the average base stat total of these Pokemon reached 406. It helps a lot that Spinarak is the only non-final stage Poison type Pokemon for this generation. Anyways, let's look at Hoenn, which gave us 5 Poison types, and let's be honest, none of them are even good, which results to them having an average base stat total of 402. But when looking at just final stage Poison types, it had an average of 437, which comes out as the lowest average amongst all generation of Poison Pokemon, meaning Hoenn was very underwhelming for the Poison type. However, Sinnoh tried to aid the Poison type with the 8 Pokemon they released. They were a mix of evolved and not evolved Pokemon that averaged out to a stat total of 403. Some of the Poison types that came in this generation were pretty good when in comparison to other Poison types that came before it, which isn't very tough competition since most of them stink. But despite all that, the Sinnoh region itself was pretty strong, causing Poison to have the second lowest base stat average across all types, only being ahead of the lowly Bug type. Next is Unova, with 7 Poison types. This is a very low amount considering that Unova is the largest region, and stat-wise, these Pokemons weren't astonishing, leading to Unova having the lowest average base stat total for Poison types out of all regions at 381, which in it of itself is the second lowest base stat average in Unova as well, being only 1 point ahead of Fairy, who only had 2 Pokemon in this generation. Although they do have some viability in competitive, with Amoonguss having great bulk and ability regenerator. Scolipede seeing some usages when it gets access to speed boost in Generation 6 and onwards. And Garbodor, well, this one's just garbage. Generation 6 only had the Skrelp evolution line, so the average came out to about 407. That's all I got. In Generation 7, the Poison type is finally getting some love from Game Freak, as they are finally creating Poison types that are actually formidable in battle. They got 7 new Pokemon, 2 of which are Ultra Beast, alongside this defensive demon. This allowed the average to reach their highest score yet at 447. Just know, Naganadel was the first poison type Pokemon to be classified in the Uber tier, without counting those that are Megas or alternate forms. Then we get to Galar, where including for Hisui, had only 5 poison types. However, if you were someone who somehow had poison being your favorite type, you finally had something to be happy about. You got Toxtricity, who was cool looking and had a G-Max form, Sneasler, who was very lethal due to its stat splits and ability to apply status condition, as well as the almighty Eternatus, which became the first non-mega or alternate form poison type Pokemon that was able to reach the base stat total of 600 or higher. And who to this day, in the current Scarlet and Violet meta, is the top 5 most used Pokemon in the Uber tier. The poison Pokemon in this region had an average base stat of 491, which is the highest out of all types in Galar, and highest across all generation of poison types. Even looking at final stage Pokemon, it remains the highest with 553, although this scoring is a heavy carry by Eternatus. Just know these averages aren't counting the Eternamax scores. And finally, we get to Paldea, where they continue to show some commendable poison Pokemon. We were introduced to 12 poison types, making it the first time since Kanto where the amount hit double digit, and whose average stats were 476. This type was really one of the worst from Generation 2 through Generation 5, due to the introduction of the Steel typing matched with weak Mons. But with the Fairy introduction, actual strong poison types, and even an ability that bypasses Steel typing, it was finally able to see some type of usage outside of spamming Toxic and Toxic Spikes. All in all, when adding the 8 regional form poison type Pokemon into the calculation as well, the average base stat total across them all comes to 414, the 3rd lowest of all types. When looking at just final stage Pokemon, it has the 4th lowest at 499. Without this recent surge of poison Pokemon, this type would have been in contention of possibly being the worst. Now, although their average strength has been increasing as of recently, the same thing can't be said about their quantity. You can easily see in the graph that the large portion of poison type Pokemon from Kanto wasn't able to be maintained throughout the generation. This causes the concentration of poison types to decrease from 22% of all Pokemons in Generation 1 to about 8% of all Pokemon now. With the regional forms added into the calculation, it's about 8.5% of all Pokemon being associated with a poison type, which is the largest decrease in frequency across all types. Now, this is very bad for the overall well-being of the poison type, as not only have their quantity rate decreased, but their biggest characteristic and playstyle also takes a huge hit. This is of course their ability to apply and damage enemies with the poison status, which technically has been nerfed over the years. Now, you already know the Steel typing was introduced in the 2nd generation, with a granted immunity to poison type attacks. But what you probably didn't know is that the rate at which Steel types are being released are increasing. This is obviously not going to be favorable to the poison type whatsoever. On top of that, abilities started to exist in Generation 3 and onwards that prevents the damage of the poison status, such as Immunity, Poison Heal, Magic Guard, Natural Cure, and Shed Skin. Moves such as Heal Belt and Aromatherapy were also created after Generation 1, which heals your entire party of status conditions. With all this being said, it looks very bad for the poison typing. But let's see if there are any ways for them to overturn this predicament, even with the insane amount of countermeasures that has been piled up against it. Let's start by looking at poison type moves. The most widely known poison type move that has been in the game since Generation 1 is Toxic, which is basically the poison status condition
on steroids.
Its capability to never miss when used by a poison type, alongside the compounding damage effect, still allows it to have some use today despite all the things previously mentioned. As for other moves, they don't really have much options. Gong Shot for physical attacks and Sludge Wave for special attacks. These could be interchanged with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb, if you value accuracy or high status infliction chances. Outside of that, these are the 3 poison type moves that will ever be used by the common poison type, with an honorable mention to Toxic Spikes. Yes, some poison types do have their own unique attack that they do use, but this doesn't benefit the rest of the type as a whole. What this type desperately needs is a move similar to Freeze Dry or Thousand Arrow that is widely accessible across all poison Pokemon, that allows it to deal damage against the Steel type. It doesn't need to be crazy strong or have any secondary effects outside of hitting Steel type Pokemon, but at least with such a move's existence, it would help benefit the poison type greatly, especially when the Steel type is seen in almost any team formation. Now let's look at the dual typing that poison is mostly equipped with, to see if it can aid in their shortcoming as a type. In Wolfie's video about all type combinations, the worst 3 poison dual typing were Poison Normal, Poison Bug, and Poison Rock. This combination is seen 8 out of 41 times when looking at all final stage dual type poison Pokemon. On the other side, the best 3 combinations were Poison Steel, Poison Water, and Poison Dark. This combination was seen a total of 8 times. Basically an equal amount of final stage poison Pokemon with good typing and bad typing. But when you look at good final stage Pokemon with such a typing, which in this case will be considered Pokemon that have an average base stat total of 500 or higher, we see only 2 with bad typing and 5 with good typing. Now, whether these Pokemon are actually useful in battle, that's a whole different topic. But one thing is for sure, is that Poison isn't let down by the type it's matched with. And the main problem Poison suffers from is itself, and its inability to keep up with other types. In fact, the Poison type also fails up to keep with other types in Specialties. In other words, strong Pokemon, such as the likes of Megas, Legendaries, Mythicals, and just Pokemon with high stats in general. The Poison type wasn't given any of these Pokemon until recently, with a top 10 Poison Pokemon in terms of base stat total, all coming from the last 4 generations. The Mega Pokemons are counted as Generation 6, and no, Eternamax isn't here because it's illegal. And if we were to exclude Megas and alternative forms from this list, only 2 regular Poison type Pokemon had a base stat of 600 or higher. The only other types that failed to have 3 base form Pokemon with a stat total of 600 or greater were Ice, Rock, and Bug. All these types are pretty bad, and Poison is no different, being the only type to not have any base form Pokemon with a base stat value of 600 plus in the first 7 generations. Now, despite all the bad things that has been said about the Poison type, how well does it perform in terms of competitive Pokemon? Do all these blemishes cause it to suffer as expected, or does its great dual typing and toxic effect allow it to remain a valuable choice? Just know the data collected for this part is from Pikalytics and was extracted on April 14th, 2025. Pokemon's usages could have increased or decreased from when you are watching this video. Let's start by looking at the Uber tier, where Poison has to compete with a cluster of legendary Pokemon. It was able to place in the top 20 for usage 2 times. Eternatus in 4th because of its insane stats and access to the move Recover, which allows it to be seen in 1/3 of all teams in this tier, and Glimmora, whose combination of setting up hazards and removing enemy hazards allows it to be seen in about 9.5% of all teams. This is a pretty good standpoint for Poison, as only 5 types has more than 2 appearances in the top 20 for most used Pokemons in Ubers. As for the most used Pokemon in Uber that has a 50% or higher toxic rate use, we get Clodsire, who ranks in 35th for usage rate, and is the only Pokemon in the top 50 that commonly uses toxic. Now let's look at OU. Poison actually sees quite a lot of use in this tier, having 5 Pokemon rank in the top 25 for usage rate, 4 of which all involve a Poison type attack in their recommended moveset. This quantity of 5 is tied with Dragon and Dark for most seen types in the top 25 for usage rate in OU, showing that their defensive properties and consistent applicability to apply Poison is very valuable when they don't have to compete against ultra strong Pokemon. This is further magnified in Little Cup, a metagame that involves first stage Pokemon. We see the Poison type appear 4 times in the top 10 for usage rate. It's also the 11th most used Pokemon as well. A plausible reason for this, outside of the already mentioned defensive typing, is that the most used item in this tier is Eviolite, an item that boosts the holder's defensive stats. But with the application of the Poison status, it bypasses defense stats entirely, and constantly damages them for 1/16 of their health. But in the doubles format, we start to notice some fall-offs for this type. In doubles OU, in the top 50 for usage rate, only Glimmora and Amoonguss makes an appearance for Poison types. I've already explained the value Glimmora brings. As for Amoonguss, it's very bulky and can bring a lot of support thanks to Rage Powder and Spore. However, unlike most Poison types in competitive, Amoonguss doesn't have a move recommended in its moveset that's able to inflict the Poison status condition. But that's because doubles is more offensively orientated, thus meaning defensive properties aren't as valuable and matches on average ending faster, leaving little room to rely on crippling damage with Poison. In fact, not a singular Pokemon in the top 100 usage rate for doubles OU has Toxic in their recommended moveset. You would have to go all the way down to rank 148, where you see Toxapex, who has a usage rate of less than 0.2%. Finally, let's look at the VGC format. Once again, only 2 Poison type ranks in the top 50 for usage rate, that being Amoonguss, who doesn't rely on the Poison status, and Galarian Weezing, who does actually like to spread the Poison status, but its main priority is its neutralizing gas ability. Unlike doubles OU, VGC is 4v4 rather than 6v6, so even shorter games. And once again, only leaving 1 Pokemon in the top 150 usage rate to rely on the Toxic move, which is Clodsire, who ranks in 100th. In quick comparison to OU Singles Top 150, there are 6 Pokemon who have Toxic in their recommended moveset. So moral of the story is that poison types aren't a team player. So what do you guys think? Do you think this type that was once abundant and annoying will ever see a glimpse of how it was in the early days, especially with the recent rise of strong poison types? Or has it decayed too much due to the increased countermeasures and decreased rate of Pokemon, leaving it to be seen as viable only when applying certain status conditions, and forever remain the type corroded by the numbers?